Sarah Miller smoothed the crisp white fabric of her uniform, watching her reflection in the chip mirror. Her dark, expressive eyes, usually so quick to convey emotion, held a practiced neutrality. She was a canvas tonight, ready to blend into the background, another face among the dozens serving the city's elite. The faint scent of laundry detergent still clung to the starched collar, a small comfort in the bustling quiet of her tiny apartment. She secured her long, dark hair into a neat bun, each pin a tiny act of discipline. This was her routine, her armor against the long hours and demanding smiles. The Grand Regent Ballroom awaited, a place where fortunes were flaunted and futures forged, far removed from her own modest reality. She pictured the soaring ceilings, the glittering crystal chandeliers casting fractured light across polished marble floors. The air there would be thick with the expensive perfume of women and the heavy scent of gourmet food, a symphony of opulence and hushed power. Her role was simple: move with quiet efficiency, anticipate needs, and disappear into the periphery. It was a skill she had perfected, a way to navigate worlds that were not her own. Tonight, like every night, she needed the tips. Her landlord had been less than patient, and the city's relentless pace offered little room for error. She took a deep breath, the subtle floral note of her inexpensive lotion a stark contrast to the grandeur she was about to enter. With a final glance at her practical, worn shoes, Sarah stepped out, pulling the door shut behind her. Miles away, Thomas O'Connell stood in the vast, shadowed hall of his own estate, a man carved from granite and regret. His custom suit hung perfectly, a dark, impeccable shield against the world. But his weary blue eyes, usually sharp and commanding, held a depth of sorrow that no tailor could conceal. His jawline, stern and unyielding, seemed to clench around unspoken grief. His silvering dark hair, usually meticulously styled, bore the slight disarray of a man who had forgotten the small rituals of self-care. He looked at the small figure beside him, his 5-year-old son, Leo. Leo was a ghost, a whisper of the vibrant child he once was. His small frame seemed swallowed by his tailored suit, a miniature version of his father's somber attire. His dark hair, so like Thomas's, framed a pale, withdrawn face. But it was his eyes that truly bore the burden of their shared tragedy. They were haunted, dark pools that reflected a sadness far too profound for a child his age. He clutched a worn teddy bear, its fur matted from countless nights of silent comfort. For 1 year, exactly 1 year, Leo had not uttered a single sound. Not a word, not a laugh, not even a sob. The silence was a constant, aching presence in the O'Connell estate, a testament to the life that had been violently ripped away. Thomas knew his son's presence at this gala was a gamble, a desperate attempt to introduce some semblance of normalcy, to break through the impenetrable wall of his grief. He squeezed Leo's small hand, a silent promise of protection in a world he knew was inherently cruel. The boy's hand felt fragile, almost weightless in his own. The Grand Regent Ballroom hummed with the muted excitement of hundreds of well-dressed guests. The air, thick with the scent of roasted duck and expensive champagne, vibrated with hushed conversations and the soft strains of a string quartet. Sarah moved through it all, a phantom in white, her tray laden with delicate canapes. Her back ached already, a familiar companion to her long shifts. She smiled politely, a practiced mask offering shrimp cocktails and miniature quiches. Her inner voice whispered of overdue bills, of the quiet desperation that fueled her every efficient movement. She watched the faces, the casual luxury, the easy laughter, feeling both invisible and acutely aware of her place. Then through a brief parting in the crowd, she saw him. Thomas O'Connell. His reputation preceded him, a silent, imposing force that seemed to draw the light from the room. Whispers followed him, tales of power and ruthlessness, but also of a devastating loss. Beside him, almost lost in his shadow, was the little boy, Leo. Sarah's gaze lingered for a moment, a pang of pure, unbidden sympathy stirring within her. The child's eyes were so empty, so profoundly sad. He was clutching a teddy bear, his small head barely reaching his father's hip. She noticed the slight tremor in his hand, a vulnerability that pierced through the opulent surroundings. She continued her rounds, circulating through the gilded room, the clinking of silverware and the murmur of voices washing over her. She offered a tray of smoked salmon tarts to a group of laughing businessmen, her smile unwavering. As she turned, preparing to weave through another cluster of guests, a sudden, almost magnetic pull made her pause. She felt a casing, not a casual glance, but something intense, unnerving. She looked up, her dark eyes scanning the room, searching for the source of the unexpected weight. There he was again. Leo O'Connell. His head was tilted slightly, his dark, haunted eyes fixed directly on her. The casual chatter around him seemed to fade into a distant hum. Sarah felt a strange tremor, a prickle on her skin. His gaze was not the curious stare of a child, but something deeper, something ancient and filled with a profound recognition that made her heart skip a beat. It was as if he saw not just her, but an echo, a memory made manifest. She almost stumbled, the tray in her hands tilting precariously. Her fingers locked around the delicate porcelain cups. She knew if she let go, she would spill them all. She tried to offer a small, reassuring smile, a gesture of politeness, but the intensity in his eyes did not waver. Leo's small hand, which had been tightly clutching his worn teddy bear, slowly began to rise. His gaze never left Sarah's face. It was a movement that drew a silence from the immediate vicinity, a small ripple spreading through the controlled chaos of the ballroom. Thomas O'Connell, who had been speaking in low tones to a distinguished-looking man, felt the shift, the sudden stillness around his son. He looked down, then followed Leo's unwavering gaze across the room. His own sharp, weary blue eyes narrowed, landing on the slender waitress with the dark, expressive eyes and long, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. A flicker of something unreadable, something akin to disbelief, crossed his stoic face. The air in the ballroom seemed to thicken, pressing down on Sarah. She could feel the sudden prickling awareness of dozens of eyes now turning, following Leo's pointed finger. The small boy's mouth, which had been a thin, silent line for a full year, now trembled. A sound, raw and guttural, began to form in his throat. It was not a word, not yet, but a desperate, animalistic cry that tore through the refined atmosphere. Thomas O'Connell's eyes widened, a sudden, stark terror eclipsing his usual composure. He started to bend down, to calm his son, but he was too slow. Then, in a voice that was small yet piercingly clear, cutting through the hushed murmurs and the distant music, a single word ripped from Leo's lips. It was a word that had been trapped for 365 days, a word filled with all the pain and longing of a child's fractured heart. He pointed directly at Sarah Miller, his small arm trembling with the force of his emotion, his voice cracking with the strain. "Mom!" The word hung in the air, echoing through the cavernous ballroom, a stark, shattering sound that stopped every conversation, silenced every laugh. Sarah froze, the blood draining from her face, her mind reeling. The tray slipped from her numb fingers, clattering against the polished marble, sending a delicate glass of champagne spinning. It landed with a soft splash, a pool of golden liquid spreading across the pristine floor. Thomas O'Connell stood as if struck. His hand, which had been holding a crystal glass of amber liquid, slackened. His sharp, weary blue eyes were wide with a disbelief so profound it seemed to crack the carefully constructed facade of the feared man. The glass slipped from his grasp, falling in slow motion. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, violent shatter, the sound reverberating through the sudden, stunned silence of the Grand Regent ballroom. His powerful frame, usually so unyielding, seemed to waver. All eyes in the opulent ballroom, every single pair, turned in unison, first to the small, crying boy, and then to the bewildered, pale-faced waitress standing amidst the scattered remnants of her tray. Breaking glass split the ballroom's quiet. Sarah stood still, hands gripping the silver trim, her heart thundering. Every eye in the Grand Regent ballroom felt heavy on her. Leo's raw cry of "Mom" still echoed, a child's desperate sound tearing through the evening's elegance. A man in a dark suit scooped up little Leo. Thomas O'Connell, whose drink had just shattered, watched with burning intensity. His gaze, even in shock, pinned Sarah. A shiver ran down her spine. The air, once sweet with perfume, now held a metallic tang, or perhaps cold fear. She still saw the boy's pale face, his dark eyes wide and fixed on her, a recognition in their depths. Staff moved efficiently. Two more men in dark suits appeared beside Thomas. One offered him a handkerchief. The other swept glass shards. Whispers grew louder. Thomas O'Connell did not acknowledge them. His eyes remained on Sarah, an unsettling question in their blue depths. She felt exposed. The canapes on her tray felt absurd. The outburst vanished. Thomas, his face weary, nodded to his men. They moved with him, a silent guard. Leo, cradled in the guard's arms, whimpered once more. Then he and his father were gone, disappearing through a side exit, leaving lingering tension. The crowd murmured, turning back to their champagne and conversations. Still, Sarah felt their gazes, 1,000 tiny pinpricks. Her hands shook. The silver tray felt cold and heavy. She wished to disappear from this place where a child's grief had erupted, entangling her. The incident replayed. The boy's haunted eyes, the desperate cry, the man's shattered drink, his scrutinizing gaze. She swallowed. Her throat felt dry. The soft classical music, resumed immediately, mocked her turmoil. She finished her shift in a daze on autopilot. Leo's pale face burned into her memory. The chandeliers mocked her with their cold light. Later, after guests left, Sarah wiped tables. A figure emerged from shadows near the service entrance. He was a tall man, dressed in a dark suit, silver hair combed back. His face was stern. This was Mr. Davies, Thomas O'Connell's right-hand man. Sarah had noticed him hovering near O'Connell all night. "Miss Miller," Mr. Davies said, his voice low without warmth. He held a small, dark leather portfolio. The scent of cleaning solution and stale cigars lingered. Sarah's fingers tightened around her damp cloth. She felt unease. "Yes," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. The quiet of the deserted ballroom amplified. Every sound echoed. Mr. Davies said simply, "Mr. O'Connell would like a word with you. Privately, this evening." He extended the portfolio. "There is an incentive for your time." Sarah looked at the portfolio, then his unreadable face. Her mind raced. A private meeting with Thomas O'Connell. The name carried weight. A reputation whispered among the city's elite. Cold fear coiled in her stomach. She knew only chilling rumors about his name. Leo's cry, then Thomas's gaze, flashed. This was not her world. "I don't understand," she began, her voice shaky. "I'm just a waitress. I have nothing to say to Mr. O'Connell." She tried to sound firm, but the words felt weak. The ghost of spilled champagne seemed to mock her. Mr. Davies opened the portfolio. Inside were stacked $100 bills. He pushed it closer. The green money felt out of place against the empty hall. It was a sum far beyond her monthly earnings. Her gaze lingered. Rent was due next week. Her car needed repairs. Her struggling finances flashed through her mind. "This is merely for your time, Miss Miller," Mr. Davies stated, unwavering. "To compensate you. Mr. O'Connell values efficiency and discretion." He paused, letting the money persuade her. The silence was broken only by the ventilation system's hum. She looked away, composing herself. Her initial refusal had been instinctive, a reaction to sensed danger. But then another image pushed through. Leo's haunted eyes, the sadness in his small face. The child's cry had been raw, genuine. She was a stranger, yet he had seen his mother in her. What pain made him reach out, mistaking her for his mother? A flicker of concern, an empathetic pang stirred. Her apartment, with peeling paint and creaking floorboards, flashed. The bills on her kitchen counter multiplied. She considered the offer, its amount. It could solve many immediate problems. But fear remained, a tight knot. This was Thomas O'Connell, a legendary, feared man. Stepping into his world, even for a meeting, felt like thin ice. "What does he want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The scent of old wood and dust clung to the air. "He wishes to discuss the incident with his son," Mr. Davies replied. "He believes you may hold some insight." There was a subtle emphasis on insight. Sarah hesitated, her mind a whirlwind of conflict. Fear warred with practicality. Empathy for the child tugged. She looked at the money, then imagined Leo's small, trembling hand. Her compassion, a part of her nature, outweighed her apprehension. It was for the child, she told herself. Just for the child. "Very well," she said, her voice firmer. "But I want to know exactly what this entails. No tricks." Mr. Davies' lips barely curved. It was an acknowledgement. "Of course, we will ensure your comfort and safety always. A car will be waiting. It will take you to Mr. O'Connell's residence. There you will speak with him, then returned home. He closed the portfolio, the soft click echoing. Everything will be handled with discretion. She nodded slowly, feeling deep unease. Mr. Davies' cold formality, the speed of unfolding events, left her off balance. She watched him walk away, his footsteps barely audible. His cologne lingered, a stark contrast to her life's smells. She finished her duties, her mind racing, preparing for the unknown. A black sedan, its tinted windows almost invisible against city lights, arrived. The driver, a stern man in a suit, opened the back door silently. Sarah slid onto the leather seat. The interior smelled faintly of new car and metal. The engine hummed silently as they pulled away from the grand Regent ballroom. She watched city lights blur, feeling a strange detachment, as if she had stumbled into a story. The drive was longer than expected, from the city center into a secluded area. Roads widened, lined with ancient oak trees, casting long shadows in the moonlight. The car's silence was absolute, broken only by the tire's hum. Sarah's hands were clasped in her lap, knuckles white. She tried to steady her breathing, but a nervous flutter persisted. The earlier fear had returned, sharper, mixed with surrealism. They turned onto a long, winding driveway, flanked by towering, ornate gates. The gates swung open silently, revealing manicured gardens even in faint lamp glow. The car continued, crunching softly on gravel. Then, through a curtain of trees, she saw it. The O'Connell estate. It was a fortress, a grand, dark stone mansion, sprawling for acres. Its windows were mostly dark, save for a few soft yellow glows, giving it a somber appearance. The air here felt colder, heavier. It was grand, luxurious, but also intimidating, shrouded in oppressive silence. The scent of damp earth and pine drifted in. The car pulled up to the main entrance, a massive carved wooden door flanked by two stone gargoyles. The driver opened her door, and Sarah stepped out, feeling small and out of place. The night air was cool, carrying a whisper through the trees. She looked up at the mansion, its scale dwarfing her. This was not just a house, it was a dynasty, a statement of power, a world away from her apartment. The heavy door opened before the driver could knock, revealing Mr. Davies again, standing in the dimly lit hall. The estate's interior was as grand as the ballroom, if not more. Polished marble floors gleamed under antique chandeliers. Tapestries adorned the walls, depicting old-world grandeur. Yet despite the opulence, the house felt empty, silent, sterile. There was no warmth, no comforting sound of a family, only the heavy quiet, broken by Mr. Davies's shoes on the marble. "Miss Miller," he acknowledged, his voice still flat, "if you would follow me." Sarah nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. She felt the chill of the vast hall seep into her bones. The air held a faint scent of old money, expensive wood, and faded floral. Her footsteps felt loud as she followed him through silent corridors. Each turn deepened the unreality, pulling her into this alien world. The only sound was the rhythmic tapping of their shoes echoing in the space. Finally, Mr. Davies stopped before a dark oak door. He knocked once softly, then pushed it open without waiting. He gestured for Sarah to enter. The room was large, filled with dark wood furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and an imposing desk. A low fire crackled in a stone fireplace, casting shadows on the walls. The air in the study was thick with the scent of aged leather, old books, and pipe tobacco. Thomas O'Connell sat behind the desk, his face weary, his blue eyes sharp, watching her. He wore a dark, open-collared shirt, not the formal gala suit. The intensity of his gaze was palpable, making her feel transparent. Her heart jumped nervously. She stood awkwardly inside the doorway, unsure what to do. He said nothing, simply watched her. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated by the fire's crackle. Sarah felt growing dread, a tightening in her chest. She could taste dry fear. The fireplace warmth did little to chase away the chill. Then, without preamble, Thomas O'Connell reached into his shirt pocket. He pulled out a small, intricately engraved gold locket, tarnished with age. He placed it deliberately on the polished desk surface, pushing it into her view. Firelight glinted off its surface. He clicked it open with ease. Inside, nestled against aged gold, was a faded sepia photograph. It was the face of a beautiful woman with dark, expressive eyes and long dark hair. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat, her gaze locked onto the image, a profound shock. The woman in the photograph was Eleanor O'Connell, Thomas's deceased wife, but the face staring back from the locket was an identical twin to her own. The faded locket lay open, mirroring Sarah's own face in the sepia photograph. Her breath caught, her fingers curled, still tingling from the gallus fear. The study air felt heavy, pressing on her chest. Her gaze was fixed on the image, a younger woman with her dark, expressive eyes, the same jawline. It was a ghostly reflection. Thomas O'Connell watched her, his gaze sharp yet sorrowful. He picked up the locket, his large fingers tracing the delicate engraving. The cold gold felt stark against his skin. His voice, a low rasp, strained with emotion, sounded like a man barely holding on. "That was Elena," he whispered. "Leo's mother." A knot tightened in Sarah's stomach. The realization confirmed the impossible. The child's desperate cry of "Mom" now made heartbreaking sense. She had thought it a mistake, a child's confusion, but this was a cruel twist. A shiver ran down her spine, standing in a stranger's shoes. Thomas leaned forward. His blue eyes, usually hard, held a desperate plea. "Leo hasn't spoken a word in a year." His voice cracked, a raw vulnerability surprising Sarah. This powerful man was broken, like his son. His grief filled the room, a suffocating presence. He described the agonizing year. Doctors, specialists, futile attempts to coax a sound from the boy. He spoke of Leo's vacant stare, his withdrawal, clutching his worn teddy bear. Sarah pictured the small, pale child at the gala, his dark eyes filled with sorrow. A wave of pity chilled her. No child should carry such a burden. "We've tried everything," Thomas continued, his voice hoarse, his gaze fixed on some distant memory. "Therapy, medication, even just silence. Nothing. He just faded." He looked at Sarah then, an intense stare that seemed to bore into her soul. "Then tonight he saw you." Sarah swallowed, her throat dry. The memory of Leo's piercing cry, the sudden shattering of glass, the hush in the ballroom flooded back. It had been pure shock. Now, hearing Thomas explain his son's suffering, a profound responsibility settled on her, heavy and unwelcome. "He called you Mom," Thomas stated, a stark fact. "For the first time in a year, my son spoke." The words hung, a mix of miracle and tragedy. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her heart and terror mixed with an urge to comfort the child. He pushed the locket closer to her, its gold glinting. "The resemblance is startling. Unnerving. Even for me." His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching. "My request is simple. I need you to just be there for him." Sarah's mind raced, a whirlwind of thoughts. Her small apartment, her job, her simple life, felt like a different world. This grand mansion, this man of power and sorrow, this traumatized child who saw his dead mother in her face. It was all too much. Her heart pounded frantically. "Be there?" she managed, her voice barely a whisper. The words felt alien on her tongue. "Yes," Thomas confirmed, his eyes fixed on hers. "Just for a while, a comforting presence. Someone he recognizes. Someone familiar." He paused, desperation softening his authority. "He doesn't have to speak. You don't have to be her. Just be in the house. Let him see you." The implications were immense. She, a struggling waitress, was asked to step into a mafia boss's son's life, to be a living ghost for a grieving child. It was absurd, impossible, dangerous. Her mind screamed objections. Her job, her life, her safety. The idea felt like stepping into quicksand. But then she thought of Leo again. His small, frail figure, his haunted eyes. That single raw word "mom" echoing in the ballroom. A child consumed by grief and silence. Her practical fears warred with a deep, instinctive empathy. She had always been drawn to those in need. "It would be temporary," Thomas stressed, sensing her apprehension. "Just until he finds his way back, until he understands." He offered no timeline, but the implication was clear. This was a desperate, last resort. He was pleading, not ordering, and that resonated with Sarah. She imagined the questions, the whispers, the strangeness. What would people think? What world was she entering? The air around Thomas O'Connell crackled with unspoken power, a dangerous undercurrent even in his grief. She was a lamb entering a lion's den, one with a grieving cub, her hands clasped, cold and clammy. What exactly would I do, she asked, trying to sound calm despite the tremor. Her mind raced, calculating risks. The money Mr. Davies offered earlier, enough to lift her from financial struggle, now seemed secondary to the situation's magnitude. It was no longer about her bills, but a child's soul. Thomas sat back, a heavy sigh escaping him. You would stay here. We would provide everything you need. Your only responsibility would be to exist, to allow Leo to see you, to grow accustomed to your presence. He chose his words carefully. You would not be asked to pretend to be Eleanor. We understand that is impossible. But that was a lie, wasn't it? Her very presence, her undeniable resemblance, was the pretense. That was the crux of the moral dilemma. Could she be a comfort without being a deceiver? Could she help a child without blurring the lines of reality? The thought made her heart ache. Her eyes drifted to the window, the darkness reflecting her turmoil. She was a practical woman, grounded in her modest life. This was fantastical, unbelievable. Yet Thomas's raw desperation, Leo's small, pale face tugged at something deep inside her. A naive hope bloomed that she, a simple waitress, could bring joy back to that child. She envisioned her apartment, small and cluttered but safe, filled with familiar smells. Here, everything was white and opulent, imbued with melancholy. The contrast was stark. Could she leave that comfort for this gilded cage of grief? Her instincts screamed to run, to refuse, to escape this dangerous family. But another voice, softer, more insistent, spoke from deep within. Compassion, a profound empathy she always carried. It was the image of Leo's fragile vulnerability, a child stripped of his voice and joy. I don't know anything about children, she confessed, her voice barely audible. It was a weak excuse, she knew. She had no experience with such trauma, no training, no special skills. She was just Sarah. Thomas gave a faint shake of his head. You do not need a child psychologist, Sarah. Just be you. The person Leo saw tonight. The person who made him speak. The weight of those words, the expectation, pressed down. She closed her eyes, picturing the gala again. The bright lights, the murmur, then the piercing cry. Every eye had turned to her. She had felt like an exhibit, a strange anomaly. Now she was asked to embrace it, to live it. The thought was terrifying. But underneath the terror, a flicker of resolve formed. She might be afraid, but she was not weak. She had faced difficult customers, long shifts, unforgiving city life. This was different, but at its heart, it was about helping a child in pain. That was a language she understood. My job, she said, opening her eyes, her gaze firm. My apartment. I can't just abandon them. She needed boundaries, some control in this spiraling situation. Thomas nodded, a brief movement. Mr. Davies will handle everything. Your employment, your rent. You will want for nothing here. His words were calm, assured, the underlying power returning to his voice, an echo of the formidable man. The ease with which he dismissed her life, her livelihood, was unsettling. It highlighted the vast chasm between their worlds. Her struggles were trivial to him, yet it offered a strange liberation. For a moment, her financial worries, the constant pressure, seemed to evaporate. A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Sarah looked at the locket, then at Thomas. His eyes were still pleading, vulnerable, but now a faint glimmer of hope ignited within their depths. He was waiting, holding his breath. She thought of her quiet evenings, solitary meals, the comforts of her life. She thought of this room's cold elegance, the estate's vastness. It was a leap into the unknown. But Leo's face, etched in her memory, was a powerful motivator. The remote possibility of bringing him joy was a magnetic pull she could not ignore. All right, she finally said, the word a soft exhalation. It felt strange, a commitment to a life she never imagined. I will stay. For Leo. Her heart lurched, a mix of fear and purpose. She told herself she was doing this for the child, for the hope of a child's voice. A visible wave of relief washed over Thomas's stern features. His shoulders relaxed, immense tension leaving him. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her decision. He knew the magnitude of what she had agreed to. He stood, his height imposing. "Mr. Davies will show you to your suite. You'll find everything you need." His voice was low, but the strain had lessened, replaced by quiet authority. The immediate crisis had passed, at least for him. Sarah rose, feeling a profound disorientation. One minute, a waitress. The next, agreeing to live in a mansion, a proxy mother for a grieving child. Her head spun. The world had shifted on its axis. Mr. Davies appeared, a silent, efficient shadow. He offered a brief, polite nod, his face unreadable. He led her out, the heavy door closing with a soft click, sealing her fate for now. They walked through hushed corridors, plush carpets muffling their steps. Stern-faced ancestors watched from the walls. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of old money and unspoken secrets. Each step took her deeper into this strange new reality. The suite was vast, interconnected rooms. A sprawling king-size bed dominated the bedroom, dressed in crisp white linens. The marble bathroom held a freestanding tub, promising luxurious, solitary indulgence. A sitting area offered plush sofas and a view of manicured gardens, stretching into the inky night. Everything was impeccably clean, meticulously arranged, yet devoid of personal touches. No photographs, no books, no trinkets spoke of a life lived here. It was beautiful, functional, designed for comfort but not for belonging. It was impersonal, sterile in its perfection. Sarah ran a hand over cool marble, the sensation grounding her. She felt like an alien, an intruder in this opulent, melancholic world. Her small, cozy apartment, with its familiar clutter, felt like a distant dream. Here, surrounded by lavishness, she felt profound emptiness. She was an imposter, she realized, a stand-in, trapped in a gilded cage that, for all its beauty, still felt like a prison. The sweet silence pressed in, a heavy blanket. She was here for Leo, a temporary fixture in a house haunted by grief, a mirror held up to a broken heart. The cool, smooth silk of the sheets felt alien against Sarah's skin. The air in the lavish suite, though filtered and fresh, carried no scent of home, no faint echo of city noise, only the hushed, expensive quiet of the O'Connell estate. She lay awake, staring at the ornate ceiling, feeling like a ghost haunting a magnificent, empty museum. Every gilded detail, every heavy curtain, spoke of a life far removed from her own, a life she now temporarily inhabited as an imposter. Her days unfolded with a strange, heavy rhythm. The staff, polite and efficient, moved silently through the grand halls, anticipating her every need before she could voice it. Yet their efficiency only amplified her solitude. She rarely saw Thomas, and when she did, his presence was a chilling reminder of the unspoken agreement that bound her here. He would nod curtly, his eyes, often shadowed with an unreadable grief, passing over her as if she were a necessary fixture, not a person. He made sure she had everything material, food, comfort, privacy, but offered no warmth, no reassurance, nothing to ease the invisible weight she carried. Her primary task, the reason for her presence, remained a formidable, silent wall. Leo. The small boy moved through the vast house like a shadow, his tiny figure often disappearing into the cavernous rooms. Sarah tried to approach him gently, to offer a smile, a soft word, but his responses were always the same. His shoulders would tense, his head would turn away, and he would retreat, his small, pale hand often reaching for something unseen. A phantom comfort. She learned quickly that any attempt at physical contact, even the brush of her hand against his arm, would make him flinch, his body recoiling as if from a sharp pain. She spent hours simply observing him, a silent sentinel in the opulent surroundings. He would sit by a window, his gaze lost in the sprawling gardens, or trace patterns on the polished floor with an unseeing finger. His eyes, dark and haunted, spoke of a sorrow far too deep for a child his age. Sarah felt a profound ache in her chest watching him, understanding the immense weight of his grief, a burden that had silenced him for a full year. She also felt the heavy burden of the expectations placed upon her, a task that felt impossible to fulfill. How could she, a stranger, possibly bridge that chasm of pain? The silence of the house was oppressive, thick, and pervasive. It swallowed sounds, making even her own footsteps echo unnaturally loud. There were no childish shouts, no playful laughter, no music, only the distant hum of the estate's systems and the soft padding of the staff. This quiet amplified Sarah's sense of isolation, making her long for the familiar, comforting noise of her small apartment, the distant sirens, the murmur of her neighbors, the sounds of a real, lived life. Here she felt suspended, a character in a play whose lines had not yet been written, surrounded by actors who had forgotten their cues. One afternoon she found Leo in the sprawling library, a room filled with towering shelves of leather-bound books. He sat curled in a large armchair, almost swallowed by its velvet embrace, his back to her. His head was bowed, his dark hair falling across his face. She watched him for a long moment, the scent of old paper and dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. She had brought him a small plate of cookies, hoping the sweet scent might entice him, but he remained motionless, oblivious to her presence. His silence was not just the absence of sound, it was a physical thing, a barrier he had erected around himself. Each day was a slow, agonizing crawl of attempts and retreats. She would try reading a story aloud from a distance, her voice soft and even, but his attention seemed to drift, his eyes vacant. She tried drawing pictures, hoping to engage him visually, but he would simply stare at them for a moment before looking away. There was no flicker of interest, no sign that her efforts were making any difference at all. The thought of failure was a cold knot in her stomach. What would happen if she could not reach him? Would she be dismissed, sent back to her old life with the heavy knowledge that she had failed this lost child? Thomas, when he did speak to her, kept his words brief and to the point. "Is he eating?" he would ask, his voice gravelly, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond her shoulder. "Has he responded?" His questions were laced with an urgency that betrayed his carefully constructed composure, yet he offered no pathway for her to connect with him on a human level. He was a man consumed by his own silent sorrow, trapped in a cage of his own making, unable to offer the very comfort he seemed to seek for his son. His pain was a palpable thing, a heavy shadow that stretched across the magnificent rooms. The estate felt like a gilded prison. The grandeur, which might once have been impressive, now felt oppressive, cold. Sarah walked the long corridors, her footsteps muffled by thick carpets, feeling the weight of the O'Connell family's grief pressing down on her. Every object, every portrait on the walls seemed to whisper tales of a vibrant life now gone, of a happiness that had been brutally cut short. She imagined Eleanor, the woman whose face was her own, bringing laughter and warmth to these very rooms. And the contrast with the current, somber atmosphere was stark, almost unbearable. Her own clothes, simple cotton dresses, and practical shoes felt out of place among the rich silks and velvets. She missed the comforting weight of her work uniform, the scent of coffee and pastries, the bustle of the restaurant. There, she knew her role, her purpose. Here, she was a stranger in a strange land, entrusted with a mission she barely understood, for a family she knew nothing about beyond their grief and their power. The responsibility felt immense, like holding a fragile bird in her cupped hands, terrified of crushing it, but unsure how to set it free. One evening, the silence felt heavier than usual. A storm was brewing outside, the first distant rumble of thunder shaking the windows. Sarah had spent the day in the sunroom, trying to sketch a bird she had seen in the garden, hoping to capture Leo's interest. He had sat across the room, motionless, his eyes on the darkening sky. She felt a profound sense of helplessness, a quiet despair beginning to settle over her. She knew she could not force him to speak, could not force him to heal. The pain was too deep, too personal. She decided to check on him before retiring to her own room. The grand staircase creaked softly under her weight as she ascended to the second floor. His door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. She pushed it open gently, peering inside. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Leo was sitting on the floor by his bed, his small back to her. He was holding something close to his chest, his head bent low. She stepped inside, her movements silent. He didn't stir. As she drew closer, she saw what he held. It was a worn teddy bear, its fur matted, one eye missing, the stuffing peeking out from a small tear in its arm. He wasn't playing with it. His small fingers, surprisingly delicate, were tracing the faded embroidery on its paw, a tiny, almost invisible stitch. His face was still, a perfect picture of quiet, immense sorrow. In that moment, watching his silent, precise movements, Sarah realized the immense, unspoken depth of his pain. Knowing words alone, her words, would not be enough to reach him. Sarah knew words alone would not reach Leo. His pain, deep and silent, resonated through the grand, echoing halls of the O'Connell estate. Every morning, the weight of his small, still presence settled upon her shoulders, a silent plea she felt compelled to answer. She understood that forcing a connection would only push him further away, so she began with something simpler, something unspoken. She decided to just be there. Her approach was gentle, almost imperceptible. She would enter Leo's room, not with an eager smile or a hopeful question, but with a quiet understanding in her eyes. She would sit a respectful distance from him, perhaps in an armchair by the window, never demanding his attention. She carried a book, sometimes a drawing pad, or just a small, comforting silence. The first few days, Leo remained a statue, unmoving, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the window pane. Sarah felt the cold silence press in, testing her resolve, but she held steady. She would read aloud from a children's story, her voice soft and even, not looking at him, but letting the words float into the quiet air. She described the illustrations, the little rabbit's adventure, the friendly bear's picnic, painting pictures with her voice. Her own breath seemed loud in the stillness. She could feel the intricate patterns of the upholstery beneath her fingers, the faint scent of old paper from the book. Sometimes she would watch the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams that slanted through the tall windows, a small, quiet universe existing within the grand, silent room. She wondered if Leo noticed them too, if his mind found any solace in such small, ordinary things. Her heart ached for him, a constant dull throb beneath her ribs. She wanted to scoop him up, to hold him tight, but she knew that would be a transgression. He needed space, time, a slow and careful reintroduction to comfort. Days bled into weeks. Sarah maintained her vigilant, gentle presence. She would bring her own simple meals to Leo's room, eating quietly while he picked at his own untouched plate. She never commented on his lack of appetite, never pressured him. Instead, she might describe a bird she saw in the garden, or the pattern of clouds drifting across the sky. She learned to observe his subtle shifts, a slight tilt of his head towards her voice, a flicker in his dark eyes as a particularly vivid description left her lips. These were her victories, small and fragile, yet they were enough to fuel her persistence. She felt a deep, unwavering compassion for the boy, a feeling that had taken root the moment he had cried out "Mom" in that opulent ballroom. It was a connection born of shared humanity, of a profound empathy for a child lost in a sea of grief. One afternoon, as she read a story about a brave knight and a sleeping dragon, Leo, who had been sitting rigidly on his bed, slowly turned his head. His eyes, usually clouded with sorrow, held a momentary, almost imperceptible curiosity. Sarah's breath hitched, but she kept her voice steady, her gaze still fixed on the page. She continued the tale, her words weaving a spell of adventure and courage. When she finished, she closed the book, placing it gently beside her. Leo remained turned towards her, his small face unreadable, but the stillness was different now. It felt less like a wall, more like a pause. "Would you like me to read another?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, offering him an open choice without any pressure. He didn't respond, but he didn't turn away either. Sarah waited, the air thick with unspoken possibilities. After a long moment, she picked up another book, a brightly illustrated story about woodland creatures. She began to read, her heart thrumming a soft, hopeful rhythm against her ribs. This time, as she spoke, she allowed her gaze to drift briefly to Leo. His eyes met hers just for an instant, a fleeting spark of connection. It was like catching a wild bird in flight, beautiful, momentary, and gone too soon. But it was there. The next day, Sarah brought art supplies, bright crayons, thick paper, and a small box of watercolors. She sat at a low table in Leo's room, spreading out the materials. She didn't invite him to join, but began to draw herself. She sketched a simple house, then added a garden with colorful flowers, a smiling sun. Her movements were slow and deliberate, her focus seemingly entirely on her own creation. She hummed a soft, tuneless melody under her breath, a habit from her own childhood. She felt Leo's eyes on her back, a tangible presence. She imagined the scent of the crayons, waxy and sweet, filling the air. After a while, she heard a soft rustle. She didn't turn, didn't react. She continued to draw, adding a little blue bird flying toward the house. Then a tiny shadow fell across her paper. Leo was standing beside the table, just an arm's length away. His small hand hovered over the box of crayons, trembling slightly. Sarah felt a surge of warmth spread through her chest. She kept her gaze on her drawing, but her voice was gentle. "These are nice colors," she murmured, picking up a vibrant green. "Perfect for grass." Slowly, carefully, Leo reached out and picked up a yellow crayon. He didn't draw, didn't even hold it properly, just clutched it in his small fist. But he was there. He was engaged, however minimally. Sarah continued to draw her own picture, occasionally narrating her choices. "A big red roof, I think, and maybe a brown door." She glanced at him from the corner of her eye. His gaze was fixed on the paper, a flicker of something new in his dark, expressive eyes. It wasn't happiness yet, but it wasn't the vacant despair she had seen before. It was something akin to quiet observation. Over the next few weeks, this became their routine. Sarah would read, draw, or simply sit in quiet companionship. She learned the rhythms of the house, the faint scent of polish and old money that clung to the air, the way the lights shifted through the ornate windows throughout the day. She noticed how the silence of the estate was not always empty, but sometimes filled with the distant sounds of the staff, the soft tick of a grandfather clock in the hall, or the rustle of leaves outside. She noticed the profound absence of Eleanor, a palpable weight that lay heavy on the entire household, even in the most sunlit rooms. Leo began to tolerate her presence more fully. He would sometimes sit on the floor beside her as she read, his back against her leg, a small, almost imperceptible contact. Sarah treasured these moments. She would feel the warmth of his small body, the soft fabric of his clothes against her skin. Her hand would hover, wanting to offer a comforting touch, but she always resisted, respecting his need for space, for control. She had to remind herself that every small gesture was a monumental step for him. He was a small, wounded bird, and she was merely offering a safe branch. The initial fear and apprehension she had felt upon entering Thomas O'Connell's world began to recede, replaced by a deep sense of purpose. She was here for Leo, and that focus anchored her. She still felt the imposing presence of Thomas, often sensing his watchful gaze from a doorway or across a room. He never intruded on her time with Leo, but his silent presence was a constant reminder of the dangerous world that surrounded them. Yet, when she looked into Leo's eyes, even when they were haunted, she knew she was doing something right, something truly good. One morning, she found Leo already seated at the low drawing table, a crayon clutched in his hand. He wasn't drawing, but his fingers were tracing the outline of a faded picture in a book, a small, focused gesture. Sarah's heart gave a hopeful leap. She quietly joined him, picking up her own crayon. She drew a simple stick figure, a small child holding a balloon. She felt the quiet tension in the air, the hopeful anticipation. Leo, after a long moment, slowly lifted his yellow crayon to the paper. He didn't make a picture, but he made a mark, a shaky, uneven line across the pristine white page. It was a tentative, almost fragile expression. Sarah smiled, a genuine soft smile that reached her eyes. "That's a very sunny line, Leo," she murmured, her voice filled with gentle encouragement. He didn't look up, but she saw his shoulders relax slightly. It was a small victory, but one that felt enormous. Her days became a rhythm of gentle engagement. She would read him tales of adventure, stories of animals, and books filled with bright, simple words. She learned which ones held his attention, which pictures captured his momentary interest. She would point to the illustrations, naming the objects, the colors, the characters. "Look, a bluebird," she would say, her finger tracing the outline. It's flying high in the sky. And sometimes, just sometimes, Leo's small finger would tentatively reach out, mimicking her movement, tracing the same bird on the page. Her voice became a constant, soft melody in his silent world. She didn't expect a response, but she offered a steady, unwavering presence, a quiet comfort. She knew the importance of consistency, of being there day after day, a reliable anchor in his fragmented world. She brought a sense of normalcy, a gentle routine to his otherwise traumatic existence. The O'Connell estate, with its vast, empty rooms, had once amplified Leo's isolation. Now Sarah was slowly, patiently, filling those spaces with quiet connection. The subtle shifts in Leo became more pronounced. He would sometimes lean against her, while they sat on a plush rug in his room, surrounded by books. He would listen, completely still, to the words she spoke. His eyes, though still holding a deep sadness, began to lose some of their vacant quality. They would follow her movements, track her finger across a page, even meet her gaze for longer, more sustained moments. These instances were fleeting, but they were growing in frequency. Sarah felt the emotional landscape between them slowly, painstakingly changing. A fragile bridge, built of patience and unspoken understanding, was slowly forming across the chasm of his silence. Her heart would often race with a quiet hope. She would feel a catch in her throat, a prickling behind her eyes, whenever she witnessed one of these small breakthroughs. She kept her emotions carefully guarded, knowing that any overt display might frighten him. So she simply continued, day after day, offering her unwavering, gentle presence. She would describe the intricate details of a picture, the texture of a tea, the warmth of the sun on her skin, trying to bring the outside world gently into his. The grand manicured gardens of the O'Connell estate became another one of their quiet sanctuaries. Sarah would lead Leo by the hand, not holding it tightly, but offering it gently, and he would sometimes take it, his small fingers barely brushing hers. They would walk among the rose bushes, the scent of their blossoms heavy and sweet in the air. Sarah would point out the buzzing bees, the fluttering butterflies, the vibrant colors of the flowers. Leo would watch, his head tilted, his small form a silent observer of the world. One particularly warm and sunny afternoon, they sat on a stone bench beneath the wide branches of an ancient oak tree. The air hummed with the gentle chorus of insects and the distant song of birds. Sarah held a large picture book open on her lap, its pages filled with fantastical creatures and lush landscapes. Leo sat beside her closer than he usually did, his knee almost touching hers. He was completely absorbed in the vibrant illustrations. Sarah read the story in her usual soft, even tone, describing a mischievous dragon and a brave princess. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling the pages of the book with shifting patterns of light and shadow. The scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the faint, sweet perfume of the roses nearby. Leo's small hand lay on the bench between them, close to Sarah's own. He was utterly engrossed, his dark eyes wide, following the dragon's flight across the illustrated sky. Sarah felt his presence beside her, a profound, quiet comfort. Suddenly, Leo's small hand, without warning or hesitation, reached out. His fingertips brushed against the back of Sarah's hand, a feather-light touch, before quickly withdrawing, as if startled by his own action. The contact was momentary, fleeting, yet it sent a jolt through Sarah, a warm current running from her hand to her heart. A tiny spark of fragile connection ignited between them, a silent promise whispered on the sunlit air. Thomas watched from his study window. The sun dipped low, coloring the garden's gold. Down below, Sarah moved among the rose bushes. Leo, smaller, held her hand, no longer flinching from her touch. Thomas felt the familiar clench in his chest, a ghost of Eleanor. Yet something new stirred within that pain, a subtle shift. He held his breath, not in sorrow but in quiet anticipation, watching them. For weeks, grief had clouded his vision, transforming Sarah into a cruel echo. Her dark hair, the curve of her cheek, her tilted head. Each detail reopened the wound. Slowly the haze thinned. He saw past the resemblance, past the memory, to the woman beneath. He noticed a worry line between her brows when Leo stumbled, the quick, tender way she steadied him. This was Sarah, distinct, with her own quiet grace. Eleanor had a vibrant energy filling every room. Sarah held a different strength, a quiet resilience in his silent home. She moved with gentle determination, never demanding. Her boundless patience with Leo absorbed the boy's grief. Thomas, used to control, found himself observing, learning, almost yielding to her subtle influence. It was unsettling, yet compelling. The estate, with its marble and mahogany, felt cold. Eleanor had been its heart, bringing life and laughter. After her death, it became a mausoleum. Sarah, with her simple presence, began to chip away at its stern facade. He saw her on the sunroom carpet with Leo, not a gilded chair. Her soft, rare laughter cut through the silence, a melody he craved. Her warmth contrasted sharply with the opulence. He hired her to heal his son, to coax Leo from silence. He expected a transaction, a temporary arrangement. He had not anticipated the shift in his own feelings, the way her presence settled into his days. He found himself looking forward to glimpses of her, her distant voice. His pragmatic side warned against this softening. She was temporary, a living memory. Yet, a dormant part of him felt a faint stirring, a warmth he thought lost. Leo, once a ghost, now moved with purpose. He still did not speak, but his eyes held curiosity, often fixed on Sarah. Thomas watched Sarah point out a ladybug in the conservatory, her voice a low murmur. Leo leaned in, his finger almost touching it, wonder in his gaze. To Thomas, watching, it felt like a miracle. Sarah had created a space for life to reemerge. He respected her, not just for her resemblance to Eleanor, but for the goodness she radiated. He had seen ruthlessness and ambition in many faces. Sarah embodied quiet integrity. He watched her gently correct Leo's crayon grip, guiding him with patience. No pretense, no manipulation, just pure care. This quality, rare in his world, drew him in. Their conversations remained terse, clinical, always about Leo's progress. "He enjoyed the bear story today," Sarah would say, her eyes meeting his fleetingly. Thomas would nod, jaw tight. "Good. Anything else noteworthy?" He wanted to ask more, to understand her, but words caught in his throat. A man of power, he stumbled over simple questions before her quiet gaze. Sarah felt the weight of his stare, an unspoken intensity. His presence was a heavy hum she navigated carefully. She focused on Leo, on small victories, on his spirit. When Thomas spoke, his voice was deep, clipped, but she noticed a subtle softening, a tremor of vulnerability when discussing his son. It was faint, but she saw the grief etched around his weary blue eyes mirroring Leo's sorrow. Their shared concern for Leo became a fragile bridge, spanning their different worlds. It was their only common ground. Thomas, usually aloof, listened intently to her observations, absorbing every detail of Leo's behavior. Sarah found unexpected authority, fueled by empathy. It was a delicate dance, a truce forged in shared hope for the silent boy. He noticed small things about Sarah, distinct from Eleanor. Her dark hair, like Eleanor's, sometimes escaped its bun, catching the light. The faint scent of lavender clung to her, different from Eleanor's rose perfume, yet captivating. It was a clean aroma, stirring a memory of calm. He found himself drawing closer, inhaling the elusive scent. One afternoon he heard it, clear and light, from the sunroom. Sarah and Amida were turning pages of a book. A gentle laugh, genuine amusement, caught him by surprise. It was pure joy. He paused in the hallway, listening. Eleanor's laughter had been bright, infectious. Sarah's was softer, more private, but potent. It settled over him, easing his tension, a moment of fragile peace. This sound, this scent, these moments stirred forgotten feelings within Thomas. He believed his heart was stone, a monument to loss. But these stirrings felt like cracks, allowing light and warmth. It was not love, not yet. It was a primal recognition of comfort, a peace he craved, a whisper of connection. Confusion, longing, and guilt battled within him. Guilt was a heavy cloak, reminding him of Eleanor, the irreplaceable space she held. How could he feel anything but grief for her? Yet, Sarah's quiet kindness, her impact on Leo, was a balm. He battled these contradictions. He would clench his fists, turn from the window, immerse himself in work. But Sarah, gentle with his son, always returned, a tender haunting. Sarah, aware of the estate's grandeur and Thomas's brooding presence, found a rhythm. She learned the routines, the sunlit nooks. She anticipated Leo's needs, reading his subtle moods. The house, once a cage, felt less suffocating, more a sanctuary for Leo. She focused solely on the boy, pouring empathy into his silent world. Thomas sometimes passed her in the corridors. Their eyes met, a spark igniting. He saw genuine concern in her dark eyes, a depth of compassion. He saw her slender build, tired but steadfast. She carried quiet dignity, a strength that captivated him. He held his breath until she passed, then released it slowly, a tension in his chest. The house's silence, once heavy with grief, now held anticipation, hope. Thomas often listened, not for staff, but for Sarah's dress, a floorboard creak, a faint voice. He listened for the life, the rhythm she had brought back. He leaned toward the door, straining to catch any sound of her. An unspoken tension existed between them, an invisible thread pulling taut. It was not hostile, but charged with unacknowledged emotions they both understood. Sarah felt a subtle tremor, a gravity drawing them together despite their distance. She attributed it to his grief, her resemblance to Eleanor, and focused fiercely on Leo. Thomas's surveillance of Sarah and Leo became less about monitoring an employee and more about witnessing a miracle unfold. He observed them at mealtimes, Leo picking at food, Sarah coaxing him. He saw her in the garden, pointing to a bird, her face alight with wonder, a contrast to his dangerous world. These observations chipped away at the shell around his heart, a defense forged in loss. A fragile warmth seeped in, thawing frozen emotions. It was a dangerous warmth, a distraction, a complication. Yet he could not extinguish it. He saw Sarah's meticulous organization of Leo's toys, her careful book selections, her dedication in every gesture for his son. A fierce protective instinct, usually for Leo and his business, extended to Sarah. He wanted to shield her from the shadows of his world, its dangers. She was too gentle, too good for such a life. This protective urge was new, unsettling, yet welcome, a primal response. He wanted her safety, not just for Leo, but for Sarah herself. Days bled into weeks. Their fragile connection deepened, woven into the estate. The sun descended, painting the halls orange and purple. A hush fell. Thomas found himself drawn from his study towards Leo's wing, a familiar, unconscious routine. He paused outside Leo's door, ajar. A soft, melancholic melody drifted out, a tender, wordless song. A woman's voice hummed a lullaby, piercing his heart. His breath caught. He recognized it instantly. Eleanor's favorite, a song from his childhood, sung to Leo as a baby. He had not heard it since her death silenced all joy. He pushed the door open, peering into the dim room, lit by a nightlight. Sarah sat on Leo's bed, back to him, rocking the sleeping boy. Her head bowed, dark hair obscuring her face, haloed in light. Leo nestled against her, his hand clutching her hair, utterly peaceful. The scene was profound intimacy, squeezing Thomas's heart. The lullaby was Eleanor's cherished tune about a star watching a child. He remembered Eleanor humming it to him before their lives' storm began. How did Sarah know it? A nursery rhyme? A staff member humming it? It did not matter. The sound was real, resonant, alive, weaving into his being. For a moment, Eleanor, vibrant, singing to their newborn, superimposed over Sarah. Pain was sharp, a familiar stab of loss. Then, watching Sarah's gentle sway, her devotion, her care for his son, the image shifted. It was Sarah, not Eleanor, bringing peace. It was Sarah with her kindness, offering solace where he could not. She was a different light. A profound, unexpected peace washed over him, settling deep. It was a quiet calm permeating his grief, softening sorrow's harsh edges, a respite from constant ache. He stood, letting the melody and scene wash over him. His formidable facade felt porous, allowing raw, long-denied emotion to surface. Yet this peace mixed with a sharp pang of grief, missing Eleanor. The lullaby was a double-edged sword, a beautiful memory highlighting her absence. He felt the familiar ache, the heavy weight of loss, the void that never filled. It was a complex knot of sorrow and comfort, a bittersweet symphony. Within that grief, a new feeling coalesced. Hope. Not for Eleanor's return, that was foolish, but hope for Leo's future, for joy and peace. Hope that this house, his life, might not be forever shadowed, that light could return. This fragile hope tied directly to the woman humming. He stood in the doorway, a silent witness, the melody filling the room, peace, grief, and unfamiliar hope washing over him. The gentle hum of a soft lullaby, a melody Eleanor once cherished, still echoed in the quiet corners of Sarah's mind. It had been a tender moment, a shared breath of melancholy and hope with Thomas, though no words were exchanged. That night, a fragile peace settled over Sarah. She understood that every gesture, every quiet moment of connection with Leo was a step towards an unknown future. The following days brought subtle shifts in Leo. His silence remained unbroken by spoken words, yet a new, delicate language began to emerge. Sarah noticed it first during their morning readings. She would sit beside him on the plush carpet of the library, the sun casting long shadows through the tall windows, a book open on her lap. As she read about brave knights in distant lands, a soft sound would sometimes escape Leo. It was a faint sigh, almost imperceptible, a gentle expulsion of breath that wasn't quite a whap, but not just a normal exhale either. It sounded like a tiny, hesitant release, a fragment of emotion set free. Her heart would give a small leap each time. She knew not to acknowledge it too overtly, fearing it might make him retreat. Instead, her eyes, dark and expressive, would just soften a fraction. She would continue reading, her voice a soothing balm, but inside, a surge of hope, warm and insistent, began to flow through her veins. It felt like watching a tiny seedling push through hard earth, a miracle in miniature. She understood these were not just sounds, but tiny victories, echoes of a voice long trapped. These murmurs became more frequent. Sometimes when a character in the story faced a perilous situation, a small, involuntary gasp would escape Leo's lips. It was quick, sharp, a sound of genuine surprise or apprehension, a testament to his engagement with the narrative. Sarah would feel a prickle behind her eyes, a rush of tears she quickly blinked away. She remembered the early days when Leo's eyes were vacant, his gaze distant, and his body stiff. Now his body leaned slightly towards her, his eyes, still holding traces of sadness, were fixed on the colorful illustrations in the book. Every little sound became a treasure, a secret shared between them. When she would gently help him build a tower of blocks that inevitably tumbled down, a soft, almost imperceptible groan of frustration would sometimes escape him. It was a human sound, a child's natural reaction, and it filled Sarah with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She would meet his gaze then, a gentle smile on her lips, and perhaps offer a quiet, "Almost, Leo. Let's try again." Her voice was soft, devoid of pressure, just an invitation to continue. She poured all her emotional energy into nurturing these fragile signs of recovery. Her routine revolved around him, her thoughts constantly on how to encourage more of these natural, unforced expressions. She would observe him while he played with his toy soldiers, watching for any telltale signs of engagement. If he was particularly engrossed, she might make a small, encouraging sound herself, a soft, "Oh, what a brave soldier," or "That dragon looks rather grumpy today." Sometimes she would be rewarded with a small, barely audible hum, a sound of contentment that warmed her to her core. The once silent house, with its polished marble floors and hushed quarters, began to echo faintly with these small, hopeful sounds. It was not enough to break the deep quiet that typically pervaded the O'Connell estate, but for Sarah, and perhaps for Thomas too, it signified a profound change. She heard the small, soft exhalations of Leo as he drifted off to sleep, the gentle sighs as she covered him with his blanket. She heard the almost inaudible when she asked if he liked the drawing they just finished. Each instance was a testament to her patient efforts, a slow, arduous chipping away at the wall of silence that had encased him for so long. Sarah felt a renewed determination bloom within her, a fierce resolve to see this through. She knew the path was long and winding, but these tiny breakthroughs gave her strength. She thought of her own life, the struggles she had faced, the quiet resiliency she had cultivated. It felt different now, serving someone else with such profound dedication. It was no longer just about the money, though that was still a practical concern. It was about Leo, about the small, vulnerable boy who had unknowingly carved a place in her heart. She began to spend even more time on their shared activities. Drawing became a particularly potent avenue for expression. Leo, with his dark, thoughtful eyes, would concentrate intensely as he put crayon to paper. His drawings were often vivid, sometimes chaotic bursts of color, sometimes precise depictions of animals or fantastical creatures. Sarah would sit beside him, her own hand often stained with crayon, offering encouragement and descriptions. One afternoon, the sunlight streamed into the playroom, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Leo was hunched over a large sheet of paper, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was drawing a bird, a vibrant, fantastical creature with sweeping wings and a long, elegant tail. Sarah watched him, a familiar warmth spreading through her. "What a beautiful bird, Leo," she said, her voice soft and admiring. "Look at those colors. Is it flying high in the sky?" He nodded, his tongue peeking out slightly from the corner of his mouth, a common habit when he was deeply focused. He continued to add more details, a tiny speck for an eye, delicate lines for feathers. "It looks so free," Sarah continued, weaving a small story around his creation. "Imagine its song, a happy song, I think, a song that makes everyone smile." Leo paused, his crayon hovering just above the paper. He looked up at Sarah, his dark eyes meeting hers, and for a long moment, an eternity seemed to pass between them. His lips parted, almost imperceptibly, and a sound so soft it was barely a breath escaped him. It was a whisper, a mere wisp of sound carried on the sunlit air. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. She leaned in, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She couldn't quite make out the word, but the sound itself, the sheer attempt, sent a jolt, sharp and electric, through her entire being. The gentle hum of a soft lullaby, a melody Eleanor once cherished, still echoed in the quiet corners of Sarah's mind. It had been a tender moment, a shared breath of melancholy and hope with Thomas, though no words were exchanged. That night, a fragile peace settled over Sarah. She understood that every gesture, every quiet moment of connection with Leo was a step towards an unknown future. The following days brought subtle shifts in Leo. His silence remained unbroken by spoken words, yet a new, delicate language began to emerge. Sarah noticed it first during their morning readings. She would sit beside him on the plush carpet of the library, the sun casting long shadows through the tall windows, a book open on her lap. As she read about brave knights and distant lands, a soft sound would sometimes escape Leo. It was a faint sigh, almost imperceptible, a gentle expulsion of breath that wasn't quite a wax but not just a normal exhale either. It sounded like a tiny, hesitant release, a fragment of emotion set free. Her heart would give a small leap each time. She knew not to acknowledge it too overtly, fearing it might make him retreat. Instead, her eyes, dark and expressive, would just soften a fraction. She would continue reading, her voice a soothing balm, but inside a surge of hope, warm and insistent, began to flow through her veins. It felt like watching a tiny seedling push through hard earth, a miracle in miniature. She understood these were not just sounds, but tiny victories, echoes of a voice long trapped. These murmurs became more frequent. Sometimes when a character in the story faced a perilous situation, a small, involuntary gasp would escape Leo's lips. It was quick, sharp, a sound of genuine surprise or apprehension, a testament to his engagement with the narrative. Sarah would feel a prickle behind her eyes, a rush of tears she quickly blinked away. She remembered the early days when Leo's eyes were vacant, his gaze distant, and his body stiff. Now his body leaned slightly towards her, his eyes, still holding traces of sadness, were fixed on the colorful illustrations in the book. Every little sound became a treasure, a secret shared between them. When she would gently help him build a tower of blocks that inevitably tumbled down, a soft, almost imperceptible groan of frustration would sometimes escape him. It was a human sound, a child's natural reaction, and it filled Sarah with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She would meet his gaze then, a gentle smile on her lips, and perhaps offer a quiet, "Almost, Leo. Let's try again." Her voice was soft, devoid of pressure, just an invitation to continue. She poured all her emotional energy into nurturing these fragile signs of recovery. Her routine revolved around him, her thoughts constantly on how to encourage more of these natural, unforced expressions. She would observe him while he played with his toy soldiers, watching for any telltale signs of engagement. If he was particularly engrossed, she might make a small, encouraging sound herself, a soft, "Oh, what a brave soldier," or "That dragon looks rather grumpy today." Sometimes she would be rewarded with a small, barely audible hum, a sound of contentment that warmed her to her core. The once silent house, with its polished marble floors and hushed corridors, began to echo faintly with these small, hopeful sounds. It was not enough to break the deep quiet that typically pervaded the O'Connell estate. But for Sarah, and perhaps for Thomas too, it signified a profound change. She heard the small, soft exhalations of Leo as he drifted off to sleep, the gentle sighs as she covered him with his blanket. She heard the almost inaudible "hmm" when she asked if he liked the drawing they just finished. Each instance was a testament to her patient efforts, a slow, arduous chipping away at the wall of silence that had encased him for so long. Sarah felt a renewed determination bloom within her, a fierce resolve to see this through. She knew the path was long and winding, but these tiny breakthroughs gave her strength. She thought of her own life, the struggles she had faced, the quiet resilience she had cultivated. It felt different now, serving someone else with such profound dedication. It was no longer just about the money, though that was still a practical concern. It was about Leo, about the small, vulnerable boy who had unknowingly carved a place in her heart. She began to spend even more time on their shared activities. Drawing became a particularly potent avenue for expression. Leo, with his dark, thoughtful eyes, would concentrate intensely as he put crayon to paper. His drawings were often vivid, sometimes chaotic bursts of color, sometimes precise depictions of animals or fantastical creatures. Sarah would sit beside him, her own hand often stained with crayon, offering encouragement and descriptions. One afternoon, the sunlight streamed into the playroom, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Leo was hunched over a large sheet of paper, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was drawing a bird, a vibrant, fantastical creature with sweeping wings and a long, elegant tail. Sarah watched him, a familiar warmth spreading through her. "What a beautiful bird, Leo," she said, her voice soft and admiring. "Look at those colors. Is it flying high in the sky?" He nodded, his tongue peeking out slightly from the corner of his mouth, a common habit when he was deeply focused. He continued to add more details. A tiny speck for an eye, delicate lines for feathers. "It looks so free," Sarah continued, weaving a small story around his creation. "Imagine its song, a happy song, I think, a song that makes everyone smile." Leo paused, his crayon hovering just above the paper. He looked up at Sarah, his dark eyes meeting hers, and for a long moment, an eternity seemed to pass between them. His lips parted almost imperceptibly, and a sound, so soft it was barely a breath, escaped him. It was a whisper, a mere wisp of sound carried on the sunlit air. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. She leaned in, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She couldn't quite make out the word, but the sound itself, the sheer attempt, sent a jolt, sharp and electric, through her entire being. The air held the scent of polished wood and a sharp antiseptic. Sarah stood near the arched doorway, a silent observer at one of Thomas's formal gatherings. The drawing room buzzed with low voices and clinking glasses. She held a porcelain teacup, its rim warm against her fingertips, steadying a hand she knew might tremble. One figure stood out, Mr. Thorne. Tall, lean, with a sharp face, his dark suit seemed to draw the light. His gaze missed nothing, and a cold tremor ran through her each time it swept the room. Leo, usually withdrawn, clung to her. He sat near Sarah in a velvet armchair, gripping his worn teddy bear, his gaze on the carpet. He sensed the room's tension. A protective instinct rose in Sarah, a quiet strength for the fragile peace she built with Leo in Thomas's colder world. Thorne detached himself from a group, moving slowly. His steps were deliberate. Sarah watched him approach, a knot tightening in her stomach. Her breath hitched. As he drew closer, his slate-colored eyes met hers across the room. A shiver traced down her spine, his calculating stare making her feel transparent. He stopped feet away, his shadow falling on Leo. The child pressed into the cushions, his face paling. "Miss Miller, I presume." Thorne's voice was smooth but sharp. He offered a humorless smile that did not reach his eyes. A new face in the O'Connell household. Most unusual. Sarah managed a strained nod. "Good evening, Mr. Thorne." Her voice was steady, projecting a calm she did not feel. Her heart beat against her ribs. Every fiber of her being wanted to flee with Leo, yet she stood her ground, fingers tightening on the warm cup. "Unusual indeed," Thorne continued, his gaze drifting from her face to Leo, then back. He lingered on her. "Thomas is a private man. His inner circle is tightly managed." He paused, allowing unspoken implications to hang in the air. The meaning was heavy. And now, suddenly, a young woman appears, bearing such a striking resemblance to his late wife. One might wonder about such a unique arrangement. Sarah felt a flush creep up her neck. She struggled for her voice. "I am here to help Leo," she stated, her voice firmer, a surge of defiance bolstering her. "He needs someone." She glanced at Leo, almost hidden by the armchair's back. Thorne's smile widened, intensifying the chill. "Indeed, a noble endeavor. One might even say invaluable." His tone held irony. He stepped closer. Sarah smelled his sharp cologne, mixing with the metallic tang of fear in her mouth. "But this house, Miss Miller, these halls hold secrets. Many secrets. Those who stumble upon them inadvertently find themselves entangled." He lowered his voice slightly. "The O'Connell Empire is vast, its interests far-reaching. It is not a place for the faint of heart, nor for those who cannot keep their own counsel." His gaze was unwavering. Curiosity in this world can be a rather dangerous indulgence, and connections can be unexpectedly binding. Sarah swallowed hard. The meaning was clear, a veiled warning. She was an outsider, a potential vulnerability, being cautioned. This was not a social call. It was an assessment, a quiet intimidation. Cold dread crept into her bones. The polished marble felt treacherous. The ornate chandeliers glittered with menace. Her safe haven now seemed a gilded cage. "I understand," she whispered. Her heart hammered, a frantic rhythm echoing in her ears. She tried to appear calm, but her hands were clammy. A tremor ran through her. Thorne's eyes read her discomfort. He gave a slow, imperceptible nod. "I am certain you do. Thomas values discretion above all else, for all involved." He paused, letting the words hang like a silent threat. Then, with another unsettling smile, he turned and rejoined the other men, melting back into the shadows. Sarah stood frozen. The teacup's warmth was now cold against her fingers. The air felt heavy, oppressive. The casual elegance of the gathering seemed a fragile facade, concealing a dangerous undercurrent. She looked at Leo, curled in the armchair, almost invisible. His presence reminded her why she was here, of the fragile hope she nurtured. But Thorne's words shattered her illusion of safety. She retreated from the drawing room, her steps quick and quiet, seeking her suite. The grand hallways, usually contemplative, now felt ominous. The tapestries seemed to watch her. The house's heavy silence was suffocating. She reached her room, the door closing with a soft click. She walked to the window, gazing at the manicured gardens in twilight. The cool air contrasted with the drawing room's warmth. Thorne's words replayed, a chilling loop. Curiosity, in this world, can be a rather dangerous indulgence. His menace, the coldness in his eyes, had been unmistakable. She felt a primal warning. This was Thomas O'Connell's world, glimpsed from a distance. A world of power and shadows, unspoken rules and veiled threats. She was just a waitress, thrust into this opulent, dangerous existence. Her purpose, she had believed, was pure, to help a grieving child. Thorne's encounter stripped away any naive notions about her stay. She thought of her small apartment, her familiar belongings, the city sounds. A world away, a world she understood, where dangers were visible, predictable. Here, danger was subtle, pervasive. She came out of compassion, a desperate need to help Leo, to bring light to his haunted eyes. But what if she put herself in harm's way? What if her presence, an outsider, a ghost's reflection, created more problems, more risks for both of them? A profound cold fear settled over her. It was not just for herself, but for Leo. If this was his world, with men like Thorne, how could she protect him? She was a catalyst for his healing, but also a vulnerability in Thomas's guarded life. She pressed her fingers to her temples. Leaving, once abstract, now became a concrete possibility. It felt like a betrayal of Leo, who had just begun to show signs of life. But could she stay where her safety was compromised, where shadows lurked, where conversation felt like interrogation? She walked to the antique dresser. Her reflection stared back, wide-eyed, shadowed, exhausted. She barely recognized herself. This opulent room felt less like a sanctuary, more like a beautifully adorned prison. She ran her hand over the smooth wood, grounding herself. A wave of nausea washed over her. She closed her eyes, visualizing Leo's small face, the almost whisper she heard yesterday. That tiny sound, that flicker of hope, was her tether. But what if the tether was a snare? What if staying meant inviting trouble for the very child she helped? The responsibility felt crushing. She imagined the conversation with Thomas, his imposing figure, his weary blue eyes. How could she explain this dread? How could she tell him his world, for all its luxury, felt like a constant threat? He offered security, refuge, but it came with an invisible price, a constant awareness of lurking dangers. Conflicting emotions toward her, compassion for Leo, a desperate desire for him to recover, to hear his voice truly return, but also the stark reality of her vulnerability, Thorne's chilling words. She was a woman alone, far from comfort, entangled in a web she barely understood. The air in the room felt thick. She walked to the large closet. Her fingers brushed the expensive fabrics Thomas provided, a stark contrast to her own worn cotton. She pushed them aside, reaching for her small travel bag. It felt light, insubstantial. She placed it gently on the plush carpet. Her movements were deliberate. She opened the zipper, a soft rasp in the quiet room. Her resolve was a fragile thing, wavering like a candle flame. One moment she was convinced she had to leave. The next, Leo's hopeful, haunted eyes flashed in her mind, pulling at her heart. She began to pack, her hands moving mechanically, folding a few essential items. Her modest clothes felt like a shield, a connection to her known, safe life. Each item in the bag represented a step away from this unsettling house, a step back towards predictability. The soft rustle of fabric was the only sound. Then she paused, her hand hovering over a small, framed photograph of her family on the bedside table. Her mother's warm smile, her father's kind eyes. A wave of homesickness washed over her, a longing for simplicity, for genuine warmth unburdened by veiled threats. She walked back to the window. In the dark garden, a solitary figure played near a large oak tree. It was Leo. He kicked a small ball, his movements slow, his head bowed. His small form seemed swallowed by the vast lawns and encroaching shadows. Distant crickets chirped. He looked small, utterly alone. A heartbreaking loneliness radiated from his figure. Her chest tightened. The sight of him, so isolated, tore at her heart, making her question everything. The packed bag sat silently on the floor. The packed bag sat by the door, a silent accusation against the grand, opulent room. Sarah had placed it there hours ago, after watching Leo's small, lonely figure from the window, a constant ache beginning behind her ribs. The fear of Thomas's world, the cold, calculating eyes of his associate, felt like a tangible weight pressing down on her chest. She had promised herself she would leave, that she would put her own safety first. Yet her gaze kept returning to the garden, to the child who still carried the unbearable burden of his grief alone. The quiet hum of the estate's ventilation system was the only sound, a stark contrast to the thrumming anxiety inside her. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, a sound almost unheard in the vastness of the suite. Sarah's breath hitched. She had expected a maid, perhaps, or a summons from Mr. Davies. Instead, the heavy oak door opened, revealing Thomas O'Connell. His presence, as always, filled the doorway, an imposing silhouette against the softer light of the hallway. He stepped inside, and the air seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken questions. He was dressed in his customary dark suit, the fabric smooth and expensive, but the usual unyielding sharpness around his eyes seemed to have softened, replaced by a subtle, weary sadness. He did not immediately speak. His gaze, heavy and searching, fell first on the packed bag near the door. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his features, a tightening at the corner of his mouth that spoke of a deep, familiar pain. The scent of his familiar, subtle cologne, mixed with something else, perhaps the lingering aroma of pipe tobacco, reached her. Sarah felt a prickle of unease, her fingers locking around the delicate teacup she had been holding. She knew if she let go, she would surely shatter it. "Leaving us, Sarah." His voice was low, devoid of its usual authority, a strained rasp that hinted at exhaustion. It wasn't an accusation, more a statement observed with a profound, quiet sorrow. The words hung in the air, heavy and brittle like old glass ready to break. He did not move closer, simply stood a few feet inside the room, his eyes never leaving her face. Sarah felt her own breath catch. She had rehearsed a dozen explanations, a dozen firm reasons for her departure. Now, confronted by the raw vulnerability in his tone, they all seemed hollow and inadequate. I, I was considering it, Thomas, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, for she was not merely considering it. Her mind had been made up. But his presence, the unexpected lack of anger, dismantled her resolve. Her heart gave a sudden, hard thump against her ribs. He nodded slowly, a single deliberate movement. "I understand," he said, his gaze dropping momentarily to the polished floor before rising to meet hers once more. His eyes, usually sharp and penetrating, were now clouded with a deep, almost desperate weariness. "The situation here, it is not for everyone." He paused, and Sarah could feel the unspoken weight of his world pressing between them. The opulent silence of the suite seemed to mock her decision, highlighting the chasm between her simple life and his complex, dangerous one. "It's not just the situation," Sarah ventured, finding a sudden, unexpected courage. She thought of the cold, dismissive words of his associate, the casual threats hidden behind polite smiles. "I don't belong here. I fear I'm doing more harm than good, attracting unwanted attention." Her voice trailed off, a faint tremor running through it. She was thinking of Leo, of the fragile trust she had built, and the terrifying possibility that her presence might endanger him. The fear for herself was secondary to the fear for him. Thomas finally moved, taking a slow step forward, then another, until he stood closer, but still maintaining a respectful distance. He did not invade her space, yet his proximity was intensely felt. "You are wrong, Sarah," he stated, his voice still low but with a new, quiet intensity. "You are the best thing that has happened to Leo since Eleanor left us." His eyes held hers, and in their depths, Sarah saw not the ruthless boss, but a father teetering on the edge of a precipice, desperate and afraid. It was a raw, unvarnished look of pain she had never seen on him before. A profound wave of empathy washed over Sarah, startling her with its intensity. The man before her, the feared Thomas O'Connell, was broken. He was a father terrified of losing the one fragile thread of hope he had for his son. The carefully constructed walls he always maintained around himself had cracked, revealing the raw grief beneath. She smelled a faint, clean scent from his shirt, like freshly laundered linen, a domestic detail that seemed incongruous with his reputation. "He needs you, Sarah," Thomas continued, his voice barely a whisper now, thick with an emotion he rarely, if ever, allowed to surface. "He needs your patience, your quiet strength. He needs the way you look at him, the way you listen even when he cannot speak." He took another half step, his hand rising slightly, as if to reach out, then falling back to his side, a gesture of restraint that spoke volumes. "He needs the hope you have brought back into this house, into his life." Sarah felt her own eyes prickle with tears. The thought of leaving Leo now, after seeing the progress, after feeling the tiny sparks of connection, twisted something deep inside her. His small, almost imperceptible whisper in the drawing room replayed in her mind. She had poured her heart into this child, into this impossible situation. And now Thomas was appealing directly to that profound, protective instinct. Her hands, still clutching the teacup, trembled slightly. "I know what you are thinking," Thomas said, his gaze unwavering. understanding dawning in his eyes. You fear for your safety. You heard what that fool Harrison said. His jaw tightened, and for a fleeting moment, the hard edge of the boss returned, a flash of cold fury in his blue eyes. He will not trouble you again. Not in my house. Not anywhere. The promise was absolute, delivered with a quiet menace that left no room for doubt. It was not a threat, but a solemn vow of protection. I assure you, Sarah, he continued, the hardness in his voice softening once more, replaced by that same strained vulnerability. No harm will ever come to you while you are under my roof. I would not allow it. I cannot allow it. He watched her, his powerful frame seeming to shrink slightly, burdened by the weight of his plea. The air in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating with the unspoken need that filled it. Sarah's mind raced, a tumultuous storm of conflicting thoughts and emotions. The logical part of her screamed for escape, for the safety of her small, predictable apartment. But another part, a deeper, more primal instinct, resonated with the raw desperation in Thomas's eyes, with the profound need he expressed for Leo. She remembered Leo's small hand reaching out, his hesitant eye contact, the hopeful murmur that had broken the year of silence. Could she walk away from that? Could she abandon the child she had come to care for so deeply? She looked at Thomas, truly looked at him, and saw a man stripped bare of his defenses, a man pleading not for himself but for his son. He was offering her not just security, but a lifeline to a child. The thought of Leo's profound, heartbreaking loneliness, which she had witnessed so many times, tightened her throat. The scent of the old, polished wood in the room felt strangely comforting, a silent witness to this intimate, fragile exchange. I don't know what to do, Sarah finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. A single tear, unbidden, traced a path down her cheek, leaving a cool trail on her skin. She had never seen such naked desperation in a man like Thomas O'Connell. It was a testament to his love for Leo, a love that transcended his ruthless world. You do not have to say anything, Thomas replied, his voice still low, almost reverent. Only stay for Leo. He did not press, did not demand, but simply offered the plea, letting it hang between them, a fragile, unspoken contract. His gaze held hers, a silent question, a desperate hope reflected in the depths of his blue eyes. He was offering his gratitude, a powerful admission from a man unaccustomed to showing weakness, a man who commanded, never begged. Sarah closed her eyes for a long moment, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The image of Leo's small, pale face, illuminated by the sunlight in the garden, flickered behind her eyelids. She felt the warmth of the teacup in her hands, a small anchor in the swirling chaos of her emotions. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a mixture of fear, compassion, and a burgeoning, unexpected tenderness. When she opened her eyes, they met Thomas's. There was no longer any ambiguity in her decision. She saw the genuine fear of loss in his powerful eyes, the fear of Leo slipping back into the abyss of silence, and something shifted irrevocably within her. She knew she could not leave. She could not abandon the child who had found a sliver of comfort in her presence, nor could she ignore the desperate plea of the father who loved him so fiercely. Slowly, deliberately, Sarah walked toward the packed bag by the door. She reached down, her fingers closing around the zipper. With a soft, decisive pull, she unzipped it. Then, with a quiet sigh, she began to unpack her few belongings. Each item, taken out and placed back into the ornate dresser drawers, was a silent vow. A promise to stay, not just for Leo, but for the fragile hope that had taken root in this melancholic house. She was making a silent commitment, realizing the depth of her own unexpected attachment to Leo and perhaps to the complicated, grieving man who stood watching her, a glimmer of relief slowly dawning in his weary eyes. The soft afternoon light filtered through the tall, ornate windows of the library, painted golden stripes across the worn Persian rug. Dust motes danced lazily in the bright shafts, illuminating the quiet grandeur of the room. Sarah held Leo gently on her lap, the small, familiar weight of his body a comforting anchor against hers. His head rested beneath her chin, his fine, soft hair tickling her skin. The scent of old paper and rich leather filled the air, a quiet perfume for their hushed, daily ritual. She traced the worn spine of the large, illustrated storybook with her thumb, then turned a page with careful slowness, her finger gliding along the glossy paper, outlining a brave, tiny sparrow etched there. "And the little sparrow," Sarah began, her voice a low, steady murmur, a cadence she had perfected over countless quiet afternoons. He had lost his song. He tried to chirp. He really did, but no sound came out. Just a tiny puff of air that barely stirred the leaves. She watched Leo's face, searching for a flicker of understanding, a hint of connection. His dark eyes were wide and unblinking, fixed intently on her mouth, following each word. His small hands, usually restless with the boundless energy of a 5-year-old, were still now clutching the edge of her blouse with a fragile grip. He thought he would never sing again, never tell his friends about the bright red berries he had found, or the softest cloud he had seen drift across the summer sky. She paused, letting the image settle in the quiet space between them. The silence in the room was profound, almost palpable, broken only by the distant, rhythmic tick of a grandfather clock in the hall, a steady, solemn heartbeat. It was a familiar quiet, a heavy shroud the O'Connell estate had worn for a year, but today Sarah felt a different current beneath it, a tiny tremor of anticipation that made her own skin prickle. She had poured her entire being into these moments, these stories, these silent conversations, willing a sound, any sound, to break through the child's protective shell. Her own breath felt shallow, held tight in her chest, a physical ache of hope and fear. "But then," Sarah continued, her voice softer, almost a whisper now, leaning into the intimacy of the moment, "he saw a small flower, brave and bright, pushing its way through the cold, hard ground. A single defiant bloom against the gray. And he knew deep inside that if the flower could find its voice to bloom, to stretch towards the sun, so could he." She looked directly into Leo's eyes, a silent plea passing between them, a desperate transfer of courage. He took a big, brave breath. Leo, his gaze unwavering, mirrored her, a tiny echo of her own held breath. A small tremor went through his small body, a subtle shift that Sarah felt instantly. His tiny lungs expanded against her, a deeper, more deliberate intake of air than she had ever felt from him in the last year. His lips parted, a fragile line, a whisper of a shape, and for a long, excruciating moment, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath with Sarah. Her heart thrummed against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, beating against the bars of her hope. Her throat tightened, dry and aching with the sheer weight of unspoken longing. She felt the warmth of his body, the faint, comforting smell of his shampoo from his morning bath, and the fragile tension that had been building for weeks, for months, seemed to stretch to a breaking point, humming in the air around them. Then, a sound. It was barely a whisper, a rustle of air, a fragile breath of a syllable, yet it cut through the heavy silence of the room with the force of thunder, shattering the stillness. "Mommy!" The single word hung in the air, a shimmering, impossible thing, a miracle forged from air and intention. Sarah's breath hitched, a sharp, painful catch in her chest. Her vision blurred instantly as a hot wave of tears sprang to her eyes, stinging them with their sudden intensity. She felt a profound shock, a joyous disbelief that momentarily paralyzed her, locking her muscles in place. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the golden light in the room suddenly brighter, sharper, as if reality itself had shifted. She could barely breathe, her chest constricting with a potent, overwhelming mixture of relief and sheer, unadulterated joy. Leo's small voice, soft yet startlingly clear in the now shattered silence, came again. "Mommy, stay." The second word, a simple, raw plea, landed like a physical blow to her heart, a jolt that spread through her entire being. It was a lifeline thrown across a vast, dark chasm, a bridge built from pure sound, spanning the terrifying silence of a year. It wasn't just a word, it was an entire world of pain, of longing, of a child's deepest, unspoken need, articulated for the very first time. The quiet dignity of his pronunciation, the hesitant but firm resolve behind the fragile syllables, pierced through Sarah's carefully constructed composure. a shell she had painstakingly built around her own vulnerability. Her hands, which had been holding the book open, began to tremble violently, beyond her control. She felt a profound warmth spread through her, a current of deep connection that went beyond anything words could fully express. Her eyes, now fully awash with tears, found his. They were still wide, still fixed on her with an intense focus, but no longer held that haunted, distant look she had come to know. A flicker of something new, something hopeful. A tiny, nascent spark shone within their dark depths. The small flower had indeed bloomed. The sparrow had found its song. The immense power of those two simple words, "Mommy, stay," resonated through every fiber of her being, a melody she had waited a lifetime to hear. It was the culmination of endless hours of unwavering patience, of quiet, often frustrating, dedication, of believing in a child when he could not yet believe in himself. It was a victory, small in its outward scale, but monumental in its emotional weight, a profound shift in the universe of her heart. Sarah pulled him closer, her embrace a silent promise, a desperate, fierce affirmation that she would stay. Always. She buried her face in his soft hair, the faint, sweet scent of him grounding her in this incredible, miraculous moment, reassuring her it was real. Her own body shook with the force of her emotion, tremors running through her limbs. She felt the hot tears stream down her cheeks, wetting Leo's hair, but she made no effort to stop them. They were tears of pure, unburdened relief, washing away months of silent worry, of gnawing doubt, of the heavy, suffocating burden of responsibility she had carried alone. The tight knot in her stomach, present since the day she first arrived at the estate, finally began to unravel, releasing its grip. A soft thud, sudden and sharp, cut through the reverent silence that had momentarily enveloped Sarah and Leo in their private world. It was the distinct sound of glass striking polished marble, followed immediately by a choked, raw gasp, loud in the stillness. Sarah's head snapped up, her tear-filled eyes darting towards the library doorway, a sudden fear coiling in her gut. Thomas O'Connell stood there, frozen in place, a statue carved from shock. A crystal tumbler lay shattered at his feet, its shards glinting like scattered diamonds in the golden afternoon light. His face, usually a formidable mask of impenetrable control, was utterly undone, stripped bare of all pretense. His jaw hung slightly open, his sharp blue eyes wide with an emotion so profound, so devastatingly raw, that Sarah had never witnessed it before, not in all her time at the estate. His hand, the one that usually commanded an empire with unflinching authority, flew to his mouth, muffling another sound that escaped him. A sound filled with both wrenching agony and an almost unbearable, fragile hope. Tears, thick and silent, streamed unchecked down his stern face, carving glistening paths through the deep lines of grief and weariness that marked his skin. He was a statue of utter brokenness and absolute wonder, witnessing the impossible unfold before his very eyes. The glass shattered against the polished marble floor, its sharp sounds swallowed by the sudden, profound silence that followed Thomas's choked gasp. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, carved paths through the dust of a year's grief on his face. He watched Leo, his small son, still clinging to Sarah, the single precious word "mommy" still hanging in the air like a fragile, sacred promise. For Thomas, it was as if the world had begun to spin again after a long, frozen pause. Leo, his eyes wide and bright, a faint flush coloring his pale cheeks, looked up at Sarah. He pointed a small finger toward the broken glass, a new sound, a tiny question, forming on his lips. "What? That?" he whispered, his voice soft, almost a breeze. Sarah knelt before him, her own eyes still wet with joy, her heart thrumming with a dizzying mix of relief and wonder. "That was just an accident, little one," she murmured, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She brushed a stray strand of hair from his forehead, a gesture of profound tenderness. Leo nodded slowly, absorbing her words, his gaze then flicking back to the doorway where his father stood, still frozen. The first few days were a hesitant dance of rediscovered sounds. Leo's voice, initially a quiet murmur, grew stronger with each passing hour. He started with single words, pointing to objects, identifying colors, and slowly building short, simple sentences. "Milk, please," he would say at breakfast, his small voice echoing in the vast dining room, a sound that brought an unfamiliar warmth to the usually formal space. Sarah would respond with gentle encouragement, her smile lighting up her face as if every word was a gift. She felt a deep, overwhelming satisfaction, a sense of purpose she had never known. Thomas remained mostly silent during these early interactions, often retreating to the shadows of the doorway. He watched them with an intensity that made Sarah's skin prickle, a silent observer to the miracle unfolding. His eyes, once only clouded by a deep, impenetrable sorrow, now held a glimmer of something akin to awe, perhaps even hope. He would sometimes clear his throat, a low, rumbling sound, and then simply turn away, unable to articulate the deluge of emotions that surely swirled within him. Sarah knew he was grappling with feelings too large for words, emotions that threatened to break through his carefully constructed facade of control. Leo began to ask questions, a torrent of curiosity unleashed after a year of silent observation. "Why does the sun go down, Sarah?" he would ask, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Where do the birds sleep at night?" Sarah answered each one with patience and a calm, clear voice, inventing stories when facts felt too complicated for a 5-year-old's world. She read to him for hours, her voice a soothing balm, filling the grand library with tales of faraway lands and brave heroes. Leo, once withdrawn into his own world, now leaned against her, his small body warm and alive against her side. The once silent house transformed, slowly at first, then with an accelerating pace. The corridors that had known only hushed footsteps and the mournful creak of old wood now carried the light patter of Leo's small feet. His laughter, a bright, clear sound, began to ring through the sunlit rooms, chasing away the shadows of grief. Toys, once relegated to his bedroom, now spilled into the grand living spaces, a train track winding its way across a Persian rug, colorful blocks stacked precariously on an antique coffee table. The air itself felt lighter, infused with the scent of freshly baked cookies from the kitchen and the faint, sweet smell of crayon wax. Sarah often found herself humming as she moved through the house, a melody she hadn't realized she knew, a testament to the lightness in her own heart. The staff, who had moved with such quiet reverence before, now exchanged small, knowing smiles. Mr. Davies, Thomas's stern right-hand man, even offered Sarah a rare, almost imperceptible nod of approval one morning as Leo chattered happily about a drawing he had made. The transformation was palpable, a testament to life's stubborn insistence on breaking through even the deepest despair. Thomas and Sarah found themselves sharing these moments of rediscovered life, not with words, but with profound, unspoken understanding. A glance across the breakfast table as Leo recounted a dream, a shared sigh of relief when he confidently ordered his own juice. These were the threads that wove their connection tighter. The immense weight of shared woe and collective relief settled between them, a quiet acknowledgement of what they had achieved together. It was a bond forged in the crucible of shared grief and miraculous healing, a connection that went far beyond the initial obligation. Their conversations about Leo's progress grew longer, more relaxed. They would often sit in the grand conservatory, the scent of blooming orchids filling the air, discussing Leo's new Greek vocabulary, his developing interests, the way he now looked at the world with curious, eager eyes. What began as clinical updates about his speech therapy sessions slowly morphed into discussions about his favorite colors, his imaginary friends, the silly jokes he had started to tell. Thomas, still reserved, allowed a sliver of his true self to show during these talks, a warmth in his eyes, a slight softening around his stern mouth. One afternoon, as Sarah explained a particularly complex word to Leo, Thomas, who had been listening from his study doorway, found himself drawn into the conversation. He offered a simpler analogy, his deep voice surprisingly gentle. Sarah looked up, surprised, a genuine smile gracing her lips. Their eyes met, and in that fleeting moment, an unspoken current passed between them, a silent recognition of their shared investment, their intertwined hopes. It was an acknowledgement that what they were building together was precious and fragile, something to be protected. Their gazes lingered more often. Thomas would catch Sarah watching Leo play, a soft, almost maternal expression on her face, and his own breath would hitch. He found himself studying the way the sunlight caught in her dark hair, the subtle curve of her neck when she laughed, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she listened intently to Leo. He would quickly look away, a flush creeping up his neck, an unfamiliar heat spreading through his chest. He, a man who commanded fear and respect without effort, felt a disorienting vulnerability in her presence, a tenderness he hadn't known since Eleanor. Sarah, too, felt the pull. When Thomas's intense blue eyes met hers, a jolt would go through her, a tremor that settled deep in her core. She noticed the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the way his shoulders relaxed when Leo climbed into his lap, the almost imperceptible smile that would touch his lips when she told a funny story. She saw past the formidable mask of the mafia boss, glimpsing the grieving father, the vulnerable man beneath. A strange, undeniable warmth bloomed within her whenever he was near, a sense of belonging she hadn't anticipated. Their hands occasionally brushed, fleeting accidental touches that sent shivers down Sarah's arm. Reaching for the same picture book on the library shelf, handing over a teacup, a quick, almost imperceptible contact as they pointed out a bird in the garden. Each time, a spark ignited, an unspoken question hanging in the air between them, a silent electricity that pulsed beneath the surface of their polite interactions. Sarah would quickly withdraw her hand, her cheeks coloring, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She wondered if he felt it too, this subtle, undeniable current. The estate, once a place of melancholic silence, now buzzed with a quiet energy. Leo's voice was the core of it, the engine of its new life. He would ask Sarah about flowers in the garden, about the stars in the night sky, about the stories his mother used to tell him. Sarah would listen, her heart aching with a familiar pain for Eleanor, but also swelling with pride for Leo's resilience. She knew her role was to help him remember, to help him find his way back to the joy that had been stolen from him. Thomas began to spend more time at home, his usual demanding schedule seemingly bending to the rhythms of his son's recovery. He would sit in the armchair in the living room, ostensibly reading a newspaper, but his eyes would often drift to Leo and Sarah, a quiet smile playing on his lips. He started joining them for short walks in the extensive gardens, listening to Leo's excited chatter, his hand resting lightly on the small boy's shoulder. Sarah would walk beside them, a comfortable silence settling between her and Thomas, punctuated by Leo's innocent questions and discoveries. One crisp autumn evening, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of fallen leaves through the open windows, Thomas walked past the library. The soft glow of a reading lamp spilled out, accompanied by the muffled sounds of giggles. He paused, his hand resting on the ornate door frame. Inside, Sarah sat on the floor, Leo nestled comfortably in her lap, a brightly illustrated picture book open between them. Leo's head was tilted back, his mouth wide in a joyful laugh. And Sarah's own laughter, a pure, melodic sound, filled the room. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face alive with genuine happiness. The scene struck Thomas with a force that stole his breath. It was a picture of domestic warmth and unadulterated joy, a sight he hadn't witnessed in years, a memory he had thought forever lost. He watched them for a long moment, the quiet tenderness in his gaze unmistakable. A profound sense of peace settled over him, mixed with a longing so deep it ached. His eyes lingered on Sarah, on the way she held Leo, the way her presence had brought such light back into their shadowed lives. A silent question, heavy with hope and unspoken desire, began to form in his eyes, a query about their future, a future he now dared to imagine. The sun warmed the O'Connell estate gardens. It touched the ancient stone paths and danced on the oak leaves. A sound, long absent, now filled the air. Leo's laughter. It was bright and unrestrained, chasing shadows. His joy echoed through the once somber spaces, a mending of spirit over time. Months passed since the library, since Leo's mommy's stay, broke a year of silence. Those words were a fragile seed. Sarah, with patient hands, nurtured it. Thomas, with desperate hope, guarded its growth. Now the seed had blossomed. Leo was no longer pale and withdrawn. He was a whirlwind of energy darting between rose bushes. His dark hair blurred against the green foliage. The air carried the sweet scent of roses and damp earth. Sarah, her heart lighter, laughed as she gave chase. Wind whispered through her dark hair. Sun warmed her skin. This was a different world than she first entered. A haven now, filled with childhood sounds. Her lungs ached from the joyful exertion. It was a pleasant ache, proof of life pulsing around her. Leo giggled, veering around a stone fountain. Its water sparkled. He tried to outwit her, his 5-year-old mind alight. Sarah let him believe he succeeded, slowing her pace. She watched his small, vibrant frame. A profound peace settled deep inside her. This child had become an anchor for her heart. She loved him with fierce intensity. A subtle shift in light cooled the air. Fresh-cut grass mingled with ancient oak trees. Sarah felt her heart's rhythmic thud. She focused on Leo, on his shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. Every detail of his presence filled her with warmth. This unburdened joy was a treasure she clutched close. Suddenly, an uneven patch of ground, hidden by leaves, caught Leo's foot. He stumbled, gasping, and tumbled to the soft grass. Sarah was beside him instantly. There was no fear in his eyes this time, only slight bewilderment as he saw her. He smelled her faint perfume, a scent that now meant safety. "Oh, careful there, little explorer," she murmured, her voice soft. She knelt, helping him sit upright. He pushed back against her warmth, his small hand finding hers. His skin felt soft and warm. She noticed the scent of grass and sun on him. He looked up. His dark eyes, once sad, now sparkled. Then, it happened. A slow curve of his lips spread across his face. It was a genuine, unburdened smile. It reached his eyes, filling them with joy. It spoke of belonging and happiness. Sarah's breath hitched. Her heart, pounding from the chase, now swelled. This was the moment. This was Leo's first true, full smile. It banished his mother's absence, bringing forth a child reborn. A single warm tear traced her cheek, a silent acknowledgement of the monumental shift. She wanted to hold this moment, but knew it was meant to be lived. Instead, she squeezed his small hand, absorbing his joyous face. His smile was infectious, a ripple of warmth spreading through her. She felt a profound accomplishment. She had helped mend a broken soul, brought light back, and found a part of herself she never knew was missing. From a distance, beneath an ancient oak, Thomas O'Connell stood. His posture, once rigid, now seemed relaxed. He watched Sarah and Leo, his sharp blue eyes soften. A faint breeze rustled the dark leaves. He had been working in his study, but all Leo's joyful sounds drew him out. A serene smile, like Leo's, slowly spread across Thomas's stern jawline. It had been a stranger to his face for too long. He had seen Sarah's dedication, her patience, her kindness. He watched her transform his son, not into a replacement, but into a happy boy. He understood Sarah had healed Leo in a gaping wound in their lives. She had brought back laughter and a vibrant hope. She filled the desolate corridors of his grief with life. She reminded him that warmth and love could still flourish. The melancholic silence was replaced by the sounds of a family finding joy. He watched Sarah's dark hair catch the sunlight. A silent, deep gratitude flowed through him. Sarah, still kneeling, felt a subtle shift in the air. She looked up, her eyes seeking Thomas. Their gazes met across the sunlit garden. It was a quiet glance, speaking volumes without words. In his eyes, she saw gratitude, respect, and something else, a vulnerable warmth. It was an unspoken acknowledgement of their shared journey. Her fingers tightened around Leo's small hand. A warmth spread from her chest, a silent connection not just to Leo, but to the man who watched them. This unconventional family had forged a bond deeper than circumstance. It was built on empathy, resilience, and a profound love for a shattered boy. Thomas pushed himself from the oak. His movements were deliberate, yet lighter than in years. He started towards them. The heavy weight of his past seemed almost lifted. He saw the faint blush on Sarah's cheeks, her eyes holding his, full of affection. There was no need for grand declarations. Their bond was forged in shared sorrow, nurtured by silent understanding. Leo, still smiling, followed Sarah's gaze. He saw his father approaching, tall and reassuring. His smile widened further. He released Sarah's hand, extending both arms. Thomas reached them, scooping Leo into a hug. The boy's laughter echoed again, pure music to Thomas's ears. Thomas held Leo close, kissing his head. He looked over Leo's shoulder at Sarah, his blue eyes warm. It was a promise, a question, an affirmation. Sarah met his gaze, her heart beating a hopeful rhythm. She saw strength, tenderness, a quiet yearning for a future they could build together. She had arrived in this imposing house as a stranger, a catalyst, burdened by lost love. Now she stood in its gardens, transformed, part of a family she never imagined. The beauty of the moment wrapped around her. The scent of blooming roses was thick, a reminder of life's enduring beauty. Leo squirmed, eager to include Sarah. "Mommy," he said bright and clear, tugging Thomas's sleeve. "Look at the butterfly. It's yellow like the sun." He pointed a small finger. Sarah reached out, her hand gently touching Leo's arm. This physical connection was now cherished, a silent communication of comfort. Thomas shifted Leo, extending his free hand towards Sarah. His palm was open, a silent invitation. Sarah hesitated, searching his gaze. She saw the depth of his feelings, a yearning that touched her. This was not obligation, but genuine desire. She placed her hand in his. His fingers, strong and calloused, closed gently around hers. It was a touch that spoke of protection, of shared burdens, of a future built on trust. The contact sent a shiver of warmth through her, acknowledging the deep bond connecting them. Leo, oblivious, chattered excitedly about the butterfly, his fingers laced with Sarah's, then with his father's, forming a complete circle of affection. This was their family now, unconventional, yet connected by healing and rediscovered love. Sarah felt her own smile mirror Leo's. The journey had been long, marked by fear and sadness, but it led them here to this sun-drenched garden, to this shared moment of peace. She looked at Leo, then at Thomas, his eyes holding a depth of feeling, promising a future she now dared to dream. Her humble apartment, her solitary life, felt like a distant dream. This was her reality now, a world of unexpected warmth and profound connection. She had come to soothe a child, and in doing so she had found her own heart's home. The air was sweet with late summer blooms, a fragrant promise of new beginnings. Leo's head turned again, his bright eyes catching a glimmer. He pointed. "Another one, Mommy, look!" He laughed, bright and unburdened. Sarah embraced him, her arms wrapping gently around his small, vibrant body. Her heart felt full. She looked toward Thomas, her soft smile meeting his gaze, ready to embrace their newly formed family.